1983, Judy Johnson, mother of one of McMartin Preschool's young students, reported to the police that her son had been sodomized by her estranged husband and also by McMartin teacher Ray Buckey. Buckey was the grandson of school founder Virginia McMartin and son of administrator Peggy McMartin Buckey. Johnson's belief that her son had been abused began when her son had painful bowel movements. What happened next is still disputed. Some sources state that at that time, Johnson's son denied her suggestion that his preschool teachers had molested him, whereas others say he confirmed the abuse. Johnson also made several more accusations, including that people at the daycare had sexual encounters with animals, that Peggy drilled a child under the arms, and Ray flew in the air. The police then sent a form letter to about 200 parents of students at the McMartin School, stating that their children might have been abused and asking the parents to question their children. Several hundred children were then interviewed by the Children's Institute International, a Los Angeles-based abuse therapy clinic run by Key McFarling. The defense alleged that the interviewing techniques used during investigations of the allegations were highly suggestive and invited children to pretend or speculate about supposed events. By spring of 1984, it was claimed that 360 children had been abused. Astrid Heppenstall-Heger performed medical examinations and took photos of what she believed to be minute scarring, which she stated was caused by anal penetration. Journalist John Earl believed that her findings were based on unsubstantiated medical histories. Later research demonstrated that the methods of questioning used on the children were extremely suggestive, leading to false accusations. Others believe that the questioning itself may have led to false memory syndrome among the children questioned. Only 41 of the original 360 children ultimately testified in the grand jury and pre-trial hearings, and fewer than a dozen testified at the actual trials. Michael P. Maloney, a clinical psychologist and professor of psychiatry, reviewed videotapes of the children's interviews. Maloney, testifying as an expert witness on interviewing children, was highly critical of the techniques used, referring to them as improper, coercive, directive, problematic, and adult-directed in a way that forced the children to follow a rigid script. He concluded that many of the kids' statements in the interviews were generated by the examiner. Transcripts and recordings of the interviews contained far more speech from adults than children, and demonstrated that, despite the highly coercive interviewing techniques used, initially the children were resistant to interviewers' attempts to elicit disclosures. The recordings of the interviews were instrumental in the jury's refusal to convict, by demonstrating how children could be coerced to giving vivid and dramatic testimonies without having experienced actual abuse. The techniques used were shown to be contrary to the existing guidelines in California for the investigation of cases involving children and child witnesses. Some of the accusations were described as bizarre, overlapping with accusations that mirrored the emerging satanic ritual abuse, panic. It was alleged that, in addition to having been sexually abused, the children saw witches fly, traveled in a hot air balloon, and were taken through underground tunnels. When shown a series of photographs by Danny Davis, the McMartin's lawyer, one child identified actor Chuck Norris as one of the abusers. Some of the abuse was alleged to have occurred in secret tunnels beneath the school. Several excavations turned up evidence of old buildings on the site and other debris from before the school was built, but no evidence of any secret chambers or tunnels was found. There were claims of orgies at car washes and airports, and of children being flushed down toilets to secret rooms where they would be abused, then cleaned up and presented back to their parents. Some child interviewees talked of a game called Naked Movie Star and suggested they were forcibly photographed nude. During trial testimony, some children stated that the Naked Movie Star game was actually a rhyming taunt used to tease other children. "What you say is what you are. You're a naked movie star," and had nothing to do with having naked pictures taken. Judy Johnson, who made the initial allegations, made bizarre and impossible statements about Raymond Buckey, including that he could fly. Though the prosecution asserted Johnson's mental illness was caused by the events of the trial, Johnson had admitted to them that she was mentally ill beforehand. Evidence of Johnson's mental illness was withheld from the defense for 3 years, and, when provided, was in the form of sanitized reports that excluded Johnson's statements at the order of the prosecution. One of the original prosecutors, Glenn Stevens, left the case in protest and stated that other prosecutors had withheld evidence from the defense, including the information that Johnson's son did not actually identify Ray Buckey in a series of photographs. Stevens also accused Robert Filibosian, the deputy district attorney on the case, of lying and withholding evidence from the court and defense lawyers in order to keep the Buckeys in jail and prevent access to exonerating evidence. 2 trials were conducted for the McMartin Preschool case. The first lasted from July 13, 1987 to January 18, 1990, while the second lasted from May 7, 1990 to July 27, 1990. On March 22, 1984, Virginia McMartin, her daughter Peggy McMartin Buckey, her grandchildren Ray and Peggy Ann Buckey, and teachers Mary Ann Jackson, Betty Rador, and Babette Spittler were charged with 115 counts of child abuse, later expanded to 321 counts of child abuse involving 48 children. In the 20 months of preliminary hearings, the prosecution, led by attorney Lael Rubin, presented their theory of sexual abuse. The children's testimony during the preliminary hearings was inconsistent. Michelle Smith and Lawrence Pazder, co-authors of the now discredited Satanic Ritual Abuse autobiography. Michelle remembers, met with the parents and children involved in the case, and were believed by the initial prosecutor Glenn Stevens to have influenced the children's testimony. In 1986, a new district attorney, Ira Reiner, called the evidence incredibly weak and dropped all charges against Virginia McMartin, Peggy Ann Buckey, Jackson, Rador, and Spittler. Peggy McMartin Buckey and Ray Buckey remained in custody awaiting trial. Peggy McMartin Buckey's bail had been set at $1 million, and Ray Buckey had been denied bail. The first trial opened on July 13, 1987. During the trial, the prosecution presented 7 medical witnesses. The defense attempted to rebut them with several witnesses, but the judge limited them to 1 in order to save time. In their summation, the prosecution argued that they had 7 experts on this issue, when the defense only had 1. Ray Buckey was initially held without bail. In 1987, the trial judge granted bail of $3 million, which Buckey was unable to raise. In December 1988, the judge cut that amount to $1.5 million. Finally, in February 1989, Buckey was released on bail after spending almost 5 years in jail. In 1989, Peggy Ann Buckey's appeal to have her teaching credentials reinstated after their suspension was granted. The judge ruled that there was no credible evidence or corroboration to lead to the license being suspended, and that a review of the videotape interviews with McMartin children revealed a pronounced absence of any evidence implicating Peggy Ann in any wrongdoing, and raises additional doubts of credibility with respect to the children interviewed or with respect to the value of CI interviewing techniques themselves. The following day, the State Credentialing Board in Sacramento endorsed the ruling and restored Buckey's right to teach. On January 18, 1990, after 3 years of testimony and 9 weeks of deliberation by the jury, Peggy McMartin Buckey was acquitted on all counts. Ray Buckey was cleared on 52 of 65 counts, while the jury were deadlocked on 13 counts. 9 of 11 jurors at a press conference following the trial stated that they believed the children had been molested, but the evidence did not allow them to state who had committed the abuse beyond a reasonable doubt. 11 out of the 13 jurors who remained by the end of the trial voted to acquit Buckey of the charges. The refusal of the remaining 2 to vote for a not guilty verdict resulted in the deadlock. Ray Buckey was retried later on 6 of the 13 counts of which he was not acquitted in the first trial. The second trial opened on May 7, 1990, and resulted in another hung jury on July 27, 1990. The prosecution then gave up trying to obtain a conviction, and the case was closed with all charges against Ray Buckey dismissed. He had been jailed for 5 years without ever being convicted of any crime. The case lasted 7 years and cost $15 million, the longest and most expensive criminal case in the history of the United States legal system, and ultimately resulted in no convictions. The McMartin Preschool closed, and the building was ultimately demolished. In 2005, one of the children as an adult retracted the allegations of abuse. "Never did anyone do anything to me, and I never saw them doing anything. I said a lot of things that didn't happen. I lied. Any time I would give them an answer that they didn't like, they would ask again and encourage me to give them the answer they were looking for. I felt uncomfortable and a little ashamed that I was being dishonest, but at the same time, being the type of person I was, whatever my parents wanted me to do, I would do." In an article in Los Angeles magazine, Mary A. Fisher said the case was simply invented and transmogrified into a national cause célèbre by the misplaced zeal of 6 people: Judy Johnson, a mother of one of the children; Jane Hogue, the detective who investigated the complaints; Key McFarling, the social worker who interviewed the children; Robert Philibosian, the district attorney who was in a losing battle for re-election; Wayne Satz, the television reporter who first reported the case; and Lael Rubin, the prosecutor. In 1990, Peggy, Ray, and Peggy Ann Buckey spoke to the National Association of State Vocal Organizations about their experiences. Peggy Ann and Ray Buckey attended the 1997 Day of Contrition Conference in Salem, Massachusetts. They were joined by other victims and experts of the daycare sex abuse hysteria. Shortly after investigation into the McMartin charges began, the funds to research child sexual abuse greatly increased, notably through the budget allocated for the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect. The agency's budget increased from $1.8 million to $7.2 million between 1983 and 1984, increasing to $15 million in 1985, making it the greatest source of funding for child abuse and neglect prevention in the United States. The majority of this budget went towards studies on sexual abuse, with only $5 million going towards physical abuse and neglect. If you are interested in true crime, subscribe to get notified when we upload a new video.